The rain had not stopped for 3 days, turning the roads of Normandy into long veins of mud and misery. Private Joe Mallory wiped the water from his eyes and leaned forward inside the Sherman, feeling the rumble of the engine beneath him. The steel walls around him were slick with condensation, smelling of oil, sweat, and cordite. He was the loader. His job was simple: feed the 75mm gun as fast as the gunner could fire it. He had done it so many times that his arms moved on instinct, but today something felt off. "Driver, slow it down," came Lieutenant Harris's voice from the turret. Calm but focused. Joe had come to trust that voice. Harris didn't yell unless things were really bad. "Can't slow much more without bogging down," replied Diaz from the driver's seat. "Ground's sucking us in like a goddamn swamp." "Better stuck than dead," muttered Corporal Blake from the hull machine gun. Joe smirked in the dim light. "You're already dead, Blake, just too dumb to know it." "Fuck you. Load he." Joe grabbed a high-explosive shell from the rack and held it ready. The tank crawled forward between two towering hedgerows, earthen walls packed with roots and stones, centuries old, now the graves of men who had tried to cross them. Meanwhile, 200 meters ahead, hidden in the upper floor of a half-collapsed farmhouse, Obergefreiter Ernst Vogel watched them through his rifle scope. The rain beaded on the glass, distorting the image of the approaching Sherman. He steadied his breath. They had taken out 3 of them yesterday with mines, but these new ones were different. They moved slower, smarter, never alone. Below him, Feldwebel Holtz crouched behind a Panzerfaust team. The boy holding the launcher couldn't have been older than 17. His hands shook as he clutched the wooden tube. "Wait for the flank shot," Holtz whispered. "Don't be a hero. Let them get close. When you fire, don't freeze. Move." The boy nodded, though his eyes betrayed terror. The Sherman rolled closer, engine growling like some prehistoric beast. Mallory could feel it through his boots. He hated the silence between engine noise and contact. "How close to the objective?" 200 yards, Harris replied. "Stay sharp. Recon plane spotted movement around that farmhouse." Only one farmhouse stood ahead. "Driver, angle right, hug the hedge." Diaz complied, tilting the tank slightly. The gunner, Murphy, squinted through the sight. "I swear I saw movement in that window." "Then be ready to erase it." "Mallory, he on standby." "Always." Up in the farmhouse, Vogel exhaled slowly. They were close enough now. He could see the commander through the open hatch. One shot, one kill. He placed his finger on the trigger. Then the tank turret snapped toward him like a wolf baring its fangs. "Contact!" "Second floor," shouted Harris. "Firing!" Murphy roared. The 75mm barked. The farmhouse window erupted in a storm of brick and splinters. Vogel was thrown backward, his rifle clattering across the floor. His ears rang like church bells. "He tasted blood. Reload!" shouted Harris. "He already did!" Murphy yelled back as the second round slammed into the lower wall, crumbling it like stale bread. Holtz dragged the stunned boy with the Panzerfaust out of the collapsing building just as the third shell turned the upper floor into dust. They stumbled into the mud, coughing in the sulfur-stained air. "Panzerfaust ready?" Holtz coughed. The boy nodded, wiping tears. The Sherman pushed forward, unaware that death lay only 20 meters to its right. Then Diaz saw it. "Movement! 10 o'clock! Traverse left!" Harris shouted, but the hedge blocked their view. "They were blind! Panzerfaust!" Blake yelled, a hiss, a streak of fire, a trail of smoke. The shot struck the Sherman's side armor. A deafening clang, a burst of sparks. Hit! But no penetration. Murphy cheered. Joe instinctively checked the hull. A scorch mark. "Nothing more. Holy shit, didn't even crack us." Inside the hedge, Holtz stared in disbelief. "Scheisse." It bounced. The boy trembled. "Should I reload?" Holtz didn't answer. He was staring at the Sherman, at the welded tracks bolted onto its side, the sandbags stacked on the glacis, the logs strapped across the hull. They had learned. Before he could shout another order, the tank's turret had already found him. Fire. The shell landed 10 feet away, shredding the hedge like tissue paper. Holtz felt himself lifted off the ground, weightless for one frozen moment before slamming into the mud. His vision dimmed. Mallory loaded shell after shell, his muscles burning. Murphy fired with calculated fury. The farmhouse was gone. The field fell silent. "Cease fire," Harris finally ordered. Steam hissed from the barrel. Rain fell harder. Blake peered through the bowgun sight. I got bodies. German infantry scattered. Some crawling. We ain't executioners, Harris muttered. Leave 'em, Murphy scoffed. They wouldn't leave us. Maybe, but that's the difference. Mallory didn't speak. He just listened to the rain hitting the hull. He wondered how many times they had been called walking coffins. Rolling lighters. Death traps. Not today. Not anymore. Elsewhere, deeper in the village outskirts, another Sherman crew wasn't as lucky. Corporal Tim Baker's Sherman burned in the middle of a crossroads. The Panther round had gone clean through the front, igniting the ammo rack. The explosion had rocked the sky. Only Baker and one other crewman had crawled out, both on fire. Now Baker lay in the mud, trembling, his body smoked and blistered. He heard German voices approaching. 2 Wehrmacht soldiers found him. One raised his rifle, ready to shoot the wounded American. The other grabbed his arm. 9, he's done. Leave him. Why? He'll tell them where we are. It doesn't matter. Soon they'll find us anyway. They walked past, fading into fog. Baker stared upward. The sky wept rain into his open eyes. He felt no pain, only regret. He had laughed about the Shermans back in England, called them paper tanks. Now he realized only the crew made it live or die. He wished he could tell the others. Back at the main road, Kruger, the German squad leader from another unit entirely, watched smoke rising in multiple directions. Reports came through his field radio. Tanks lost. Pack guns destroyed. Infantry retreating. Something was wrong. Very wrong. He turned to his men. The Shermans are different today. Different how? Asked Private Lucas. They fight like us? Silence. Orders? Asked another. Kruger adjusted his helmet. We adapt. Or we die. And from somewhere far across the field, Mallory's Sherman rolled onward, unbroken, its engine growling like thunder. Tomorrow someone would call it a hero. But today, it was just a survivor. The rain didn't quit. It just changed its mind. It went from a steady curtain to a cold drizzle, the kind that slipped under collars and pooled in boots, the kind that made you notice every ounce of gear on your back. Private Joe Mallory braced his shoulders against the ammo racks as the Sherman lurched in second gear. He could feel each tooth of the track bite and slip in the mud. He kept one gloved hand on the next he shell, fingertips resting over the stamped letters as if to read them like Braille. Hold the line to the right, Diaz, Lieutenant Harris said from the turret, calm and clipped. Bocage tightens ahead. We're gonna nose in, pivot, and peek. Murphy hunched on his sight, chewing a sliver of tobacco into paper-thin frustration. Peek is goddamn right. These hedges are coffins with branches. Loader he, Harris said. I'm married to it, Mallory answered. Blake grunted at the bowgun. You're married to your pillow. The tank's intercom crackled with a half laugh and the soft hiss of engine revs. Outside, the hedgerow tunnel squeezed narrower. Roots like knotted fists grabbed daylight out of the sky. The Sherman felt too big for the lane, like a farm bull being led into a butcher's door. The radio ghosted with static and a voice punched through. Able to, this is Red Lead. Harassing fire from the orchard left of the farmhouse. Watch for Panzerfausts in the ditch. Out. Copy Red Lead, Harris replied. Murphy, you've got that upper window on the farmhouse. Been staring at it so long I'm charging rent, Murphy said. They nudged forward, then stopped as the bogey wheel bit into a sunken rut. Diaz rocked the beast with a gentle throttle. The hull shivered. Come on, baby, he whispered to 30 tons of steel. The tank heaved up and forward. The farmhouse revealed itself in pieces. Roofline, a crooked chimney, a toothy window. Murphy tightened his cheek just so and breathed shallow. Mallory pictured the shell's metal skin under his hands. Imagined the chamber door slam shut, the recoil hammering everything backward a few inches. The ready rack breathing one lighter. Contact. Shadow in the window, Harris said. Voice sharpening. Firing, Murphy said, and the 75 spat thunder. The farmhouse's second floor burst into powder and light. Mallory already had the second he up and in, his shoulder braced, his palm slapping the breech guard as the round seated. Up! Send it, Harris. The gun's bark sent hot breath through the turret like a furnace door swing. The first shell had unseamed the room. The second caved the wall and spilled the inside out. A third round turned rafters into matchsticks and sent shingles clattering into the courtyard like sleet. Cease, Harris said. We're not painters. They waited, all ears. Outside was rain and the ticking cool of a ruined house, the snapping dance of fire meeting wet timber. Then quietly, feet in the ditch, someone stumbling, a curse in German. A cry, young, high, and almost swallowed by the rain. "We're moving," Harris said. Diaz bumped to 5 yards, then stop. Diaz coaxed the tank forward, the log bundle on their glacis flexing under the hedge. The rhino cutter they'd welded up, scavenged steel teeth, bit roots under the hedge and chewed a dark mouth open. Mallory felt the tank's confidence in his bones like the heat of coffee before dawn. They weren't plowing blind anymore. The view snapped wider. The lane spilled into a cross corridor of hedges where cart ruts met, forming muddy intersections that might have been quaint if not for the ash and wrecks. On their right, half swallowed by a sunken lane, a Panzer IV lay silent, angled in like a corpse with its hands folded. A lazy curl of smoke breathed from its engine deck. Murphy muttered, "One of ours got him," or he cooked himself trying to shift. "Eyes up," Harris replied. "If there's one, there's two. They hunt in pairs, same as wolves." Across the field, Feldwebel Wilhelm Kruger rested his binoculars on a sandbag and watched the American tank take breath at the hedge. He felt every raindrop in his neck muscles. He'd learned to measure small things on days like this. The way a tank's commander behaved when he was green or when he was patient. The way a bowgun jittered when the gunner was nervous. These Americans were not jittering. They remodeled the hedges themselves, steel teeth gnawing centuries of roots, while the gun swung like a fox's ear. He slid the glasses down and wiped the lenses with a square of cloth. "Sir?" Lucas, the skinny private with the too-tight chin strap, hovered by the trench lip. "Pack gun reports they can't fix on a flank. Hedge too thick. Then the hedge is the enemy," Kruger said softly. "Tell them to shift 15 meters left, cut a loophole, and hold their fire until the Sherman shows the soft place." He watched Lucas sprint bent double between two gaps and return with his breath misting. "And the Panther?" "Stuck near the orchard, sir. Powertrain trouble. They're swearing in 2 dialects." "Good," Kruger said. "Swearing means they're still alive." He looked back through the glasses. The American tank's commander was giving hand signals to infantry shadows fluttering along the ditch, close, tight, like dogs under a table. He had watched them do this in Italy through captured films and thought they were propaganda cuts. Now he was seeing it for himself. Men who used their tank like a moving wall. The crew inside trusting the men outside not to wander, and the men outside trusting the tank to be where it needed to be. "Sir?" one of his corporals hissed, tapping his shoulder and pointing through a slit in the hedge. Left, 2 more Shermans. He saw them then, shadows in the green, noses hidden, only the hint of a muzzle brake and the impatient shudder of an idling engine. Once he would have said, "We will burn them." Today he thought, "We will survive them if we are clever." Kruger keyed his throat mic. "Panzerfaust teams, hold. You wait until they are so close you can hit their teeth. Pack 40, first shot at the second tank, not the lead. Make them wonder which way the death came from." A rolling snarl of diesel crawled over the hedge from the left, interrupted by coughing backfires and guttural curses. The Panther, crew hatched open, ground past an apple tree with its turret lifted like an arrogant chin. Its commander cupped a hand to his mouth. "We'll pin them," he shouted to nobody in particular. "Walk our shells across their line." Kruger frowned. That volunteer confidence built monuments and mass graves. "Keep him hidden until we own the first mistake," he told the gun crews. Not before. Inside Harris's Sherman, the air was that familiar stew of exhaust and oil and residual propellant that lived in their clothes long after they climbed out. Mallory rotated on his heels, checked his next 2 shells, a pair of AP and 1 HE at his left knee, a smoke round lower in case they had to disappear. He loved the lazy geometry of readiness, every motion 1 hinge away from happening. "Company wants the crossroads," Harris said. "We're the crowbar. Able 3 and Able 5 will ladder behind us and angle right. Keep the lane honest." "Honest with who?" Murphy said. "With God," Harris said, and Mallory smirked despite himself. They lurched forward. The cutter teeth chewed another mouth into the hedge. Diaz feathered it over the lip, a tingle running through Mallory's calves as the tank found purchase. As they nosed into open space, the field broadened like a held breath. Puddles twitched in the rain. Scattered haystacks wore their own weather like shawls. Silence for 2 heartbeats, then "Flash!" Murphy yelled. "Left muzzle flash, 5 o'clock to us, behind that split tree." "Traverse left!" Harris snapped. "On!" Murphy said. Send it. The gun slammed. The split tree dissolved in bark and black smoke. Mallory slammed the next round in by muscle memory. Through the smoke, the Pak-40 spoke back. A flat, lethal whip crack that struck the bogey plate with a white-hot clang and a shower of sparks like fireflies. The tank jerked. Everyone inside swore at once. Hit. Non-pen. Blake breathed. Jesus, I felt that in my fillings. Angle. Diaz. Give me 5 degrees to starboard. Nose down, Harris said, his voice calm like a hand on someone's shoulder. Murphy sent a second he into the loophole. The gun crew behind it hurled themselves flat. One man didn't move. The others did. Crawling like men dragged their souls behind them. Somewhere to the right, a bowgun from another Sherman stitched a hedge with bright sewing needle tracers. U.S. infantry flooded the ditch and flopped into fire positions, as if the ground had leaned to receive them. Kruger felt the shock through the earth, the way you feel thunder through a window frame. He peered through his slit and saw the POG gun's shield lift on one side. He wanted to shout the first man's name, but in the rain and the gun roars and the old earth smell, names were paper boats in a flood. Panther, he growled into the mic. Now, not fancy. 2 rounds. Fast. The Panther barked from the orchard with a sound like iron dragons clapping. Its shell shaved a hedge between Shermans, tore into a sunken lane, and sent a mound of wet earth fountaining high. The second shot came before the first dirt landed, and it was true. It punched into Able 3's lower glacis and ricocheted through the driver's bay, shoving Diaz's counterpart out of the world. Able 3 didn't explode, just shuddered and went silent, like a breath held too long. Jesus, Murphy rasped, then clenched his jaw as if to chew the words back down. Panther, he said, steadier. Orchard, grid of apple trunks, 3rd row, 2 gaps left of the barn. Mallory, AP, Harris said. Up, driver, pivot left. I want his flank. Blake, watch for Faust teams. Your life depends on it. I like my life, Blake said. A little. He racked the bow gun and watched the hedges as if they were crowded theaters. They angled. The Sherman's hull shrieked through the hedge roots, the cutter proving its worth as the tank made a new door where none had been. Mallory swayed with the hull's flex and brought his shoulder hard into the next round. He checked the loader's tray, the catch. He thought of nothing. He thought of everything. He breathed on the count he'd learned, 1, 2, 3, 4, while his world narrowed to metal, order, slam, safety, up, and the small, hot breath of the next second. Murphy steadied the sight on a ghost. Panther's turret ring just visible through orchard haze. The German tank had reversed to cover its case ejection port, the crew wise and quick, but not quick enough. Send, Harris said, and Murphy did. The AP round crossed the orchard like a decision. It struck the Panther hard behind the right road wheel and cored into the engine compartment. For a heartbeat, the enemy tank seemed to swallow the impact, to bend around the idea of it, and then black smoke coughed out of the vents in a ragged sigh. Up, Mallory said, not listening for the cheer that tried to happen in his throat. Again, Harris said. Murphy hit the same spot. This time fire came up greasy and red. The turret hatch kicked open. A figure emerged, caught between the need to live and the need to not be seen. He made it half out, hesitated, and fell onto the deck. The second man hauled him, shoved him, jumped. The third never came. Inside the orchard, Kruger swore. He stepped into the lane and put 2 shots from his carbine into the shadow at the Panther's side, not because it mattered, but because it kept his men's eyes away from the burning. New cover, he said. Pull to the next hedge, slow now. We aren't ghosts. The American tank with the teeth and the slow turret turned toward the field again, toward the broken farmhouse and the whispers moving in the ditch. He felt a tug behind his breastbone, the old superstition that you know the other commander in some way, that you are playing chess through smoke. He stole a glance through the hedge slit and saw what he needed to see. An American lieutenant standing on the bucket of his turret, rain dragging tails off his field glasses, hand signals clean, posture low and listening, not standing up and yelling to show his men he was brave. He was brave because he was small when he needed to be. Damn them. Damn them for learning. The afternoon unspooled into exchanges of breath held and released. Artillery murmured beyond the ridge like a hungry city. Mortars plopped and hissed. A sniper pulled 2 Americans into the earth and then met his own small ending from a DP'd Browning. Mule carts waited in shadowed lanes with crates of ammunition that looked like small houses. A medic knelt in a doorway and told a man with a ruined leg to keep talking, it helps, keep talking. And the man said nervously, "About what?" And the medic said, "Anything." And the man said, "I had a dog when I was a kid, the dumbest bastard you ever met." And they both laughed until one of them cried. At the crossroads, 4 hedged lanes meeting and no signposts worth a damn, the fight grew messy and fast. Able 5 nose-kissed a mine and shrugged it with a ripped track. They slewed into a ditch, and their crew boiled out under a curtain of machine gun fire that traced bright lines in the rain. Harris's crew saw the sparks before they heard the bullets. "Blake, button that gap!" Harris snapped. Blake walked the 30 across the hedge lip with a practiced stitch that looked almost lazy until the screaming stopped. The air smelled like hot pennies. Murphy muttered something soft and private. Mallory loaded quick, then slower on purpose, forcing his hands to be the metronome rather than the drum roll. A German pot gun tried again from the far corner. But this time the American infantry were in the hedge before the second shot. Grenades popped like angry corks. And someone kicked the muzzle down with a curse that sounded more like home than hate. One of the Germans came out with hands high and eyes wide, his cheeks muddy with blood that probably wasn't his. A young American sergeant screamed at him to turn on the ground. And then the sergeant's voice cracked and switched to something careful, as if he suddenly remembered that prisoners had ears and his words could outlive him. "Diaz," Harris said, "push to the marker post and hold. We anchor there until the left catches up." "We're running light on AP," Mallory said, not complaining, just adding water to the pot. "Copy," Harris replied. "We'll make the HE do ballet if we must." They crawled the last 50 yards into a posture that felt like a hand closing. The crossroads inched under their bow and stopped there, stubborn and ugly, and theirs for the moment. The rain paused long enough to let the smell of churned earth and cordite stand up and stretch. Somewhere a chicken clucked once in outrage, and then remembered it was not a thing anymore. Kruger pulled his squad back from the next lane over, using the hedge like a theater curtain. He knelt in the ditch and put his hands on the sides of his helmet and closed his eyes. He could name every man nearby by his cough or the way he shuffled his boots in the mud. He could smell the difference between 24 hours of fear and 3 days. He could feel time coming toward him with its hands open. He had believed things about the Sherman because he needed to believe that German steel, German math, German training could not be outdone by speed and numbers, and men who laughed too loud and chewed gum during briefings. He was a practical man. He adjusted. "Listen," he said quietly. "They're not charging. They're not giving us silhouettes. They move with their infantry like a mouth and a tongue. Don't give them a tooth to bite. We wait until they lean. Then we make them fall into the ditch." He looked at Lucas, still too young and getting older by the hour. "Get the remaining Fausts to the dead ground at the farmhouse foundation. If they come past the crossroads, we give them the last lesson we have." The last lesson was never complicated. It didn't need to be. Dusk dropped early, as if the clouds could not hold the day aloft any longer. The world went to shades of graphite and ghost, the hedges flattening into walls with no seams. Harris's crew buttoned hatches, then cracked them again when the air inside turned to warm soup. The gun was cleaned with the reverence of a ritual in a church that had lost its roof but not its prayers. Mallory rubbed a patch into the breech that didn't need it and ran his thumb along the lip where the metal was just starting to wear to a friendly curve. "Think about home," Blake said quietly into the dark. "Just for a minute. I'm home," Diaz said dryly. "She's a classy lady. Eats like a horse, sleeps like a dead mule. What's she's got that you love?" Mallory asked, letting the quiet question move through the tank like a cat brushing knees. Diaz patted the dash. "She forgives my mistakes if I admit them." "Can't ask more than that." Murphy, voice softer than he'd ever let it be, added, "She asked me to do one impossible thing, not 10. Keeps it simple." They were all quiet for a few seconds. Outside, men shuffled. Canteens clicked. A radio coughed. "Home is my kid brother's baseball glove," Murphy said finally. "Left in the yard in the rain, and he'd cry about the leather getting stiff, and my ma would oil it like it was an altar." Mallory had nothing. He had shipped out before he'd collected anything worth describing. He thought of the steel smell that lived in his skin now, and wondered whether it would scare off every dog he ever owned. On the far side of the hedges, Kruger shared a cigarette with Lucas and broke it into careful halves. The shorter half tasted no different. "When I was a boy," he said, "my father taught me to split logs with one swing. He said the trick is not strength. It is looking just past the wood at the place you want the axe head to appear. Don't look where you are. Look where you mean to end." Lucas stared into the wet dark. "And now?" "Now we look through the American tank." "How?" Lucas whispered. It wasn't a challenge. It was arithmetic he wanted to learn. "We don't shoot where it is," Kruger said. "We shoot where it's already taking the next breath. Watch the infantry. They'll show you the tank's lungs." The first mortar of the evening came in with a gentle suggestion rather than a command. It plopped into the lane behind the Americans and left a bowl in the mud that filled instantly with black water. It was a probe. The answer was immediate. American mortars coughed twice in reply, and their shells walked 30 yards left and right, apologizing to no one. Then, rooted in the dusk, Able 5's crew worked a new track on with the patience of carpenters, while infantry rotated positions in whispers, and a runner ghosted up to Harris's tank and banged once on the glacis. "Message," the runner said when Harris cracked the hatch. "We hold this all night if we can." "Dawn push to the church spire. Unknown armor to our rear may swing forward. We'll mark with green flares." "Understood," Harris said. He stared at the runner a second longer. "Tell someone with a pencil I need ammo and we're thirsty." The runner nodded like a man receiving a diagnosis. "We all are, sir." Night became a different war, smaller and closer, and somehow more vicious in its narrowness. German patrols sniffed the edges of the crossroads. American listening posts peeled away tiny rustles from the general sea of wet noise. Once, someone on the German side screamed, a short, strangled sound like a hand closing on a throat, followed by men whispering, "Hans, Hans," and then silence that felt heavier than the sky. In that darkness, two German boys with Faust's belly crabbed to the farmhouse foundation that Harris's gun had reduced to jagged ankles. They waited as a tank's engine idled beyond the hedge, a sound as intimate as breathing. One boy said a prayer he had learned from a grandmother who kept her rosary in a teacup. The other thought of a dance he had watched in a village square and tried to remember the girl's shoes. They lay there for an hour under the wet stink of smoldering wood. Then the tank traversed a degree, and its hull shifted, and the noise of its engine moved an inch in their heads, and that inch put it into their killing arc. They lifted the Fausts together like men raising an oar. Inside the Sherman, Mallory felt the tiny change under his boots. He said, "Driver, back a touch." At the same instant, Harris said, "Hold." The first Faust hissed and crackled past the Sherman's nose at kissing distance and smashed into the hedge, painting it with fire and a sound like a dragon inhaling. The second struck the log bundle and ate itself on the soaked wood with an explosion that felt personal more than lethal, the kind that made every tooth in your head feel discovered. "Contact, right?" Blake snarled, already walking the bow gun through the hedge teeth. He saw two tiny forms fold into the mud and then get up despite the bullets, flopping like fish that refused to know they'd been caught. The 30 convinced them. A grenade from the infantry sealed the whisper with smoke. "They're learning too," Murphy said in a voice that wasn't congratulating anyone. "Everyone learns on this road," Harris said, "and the road doesn't care who graduates." A hush followed that wasn't peace. It was the gap between overtures. Men slept in slices like loaves cut unevenly. Others talked in low voices about things that might be true in other towns. The lulls were so complete that you could hear a watch tick inside your own sleeve and mistake it for someone else's heart. Shortly before dawn, a single green flare climbed on the American side and reached a height that suggested careful calculation rather than panic. It hung there dripping cold light like a lantern in fog. Then engines murmured and clicked. Tanks whose tracks had frozen with mud woke, stretched, and found their feet. "Up," Harris said, tapping the turret ring as if to warm it. "We move on the flare. Church spire. We don't own it until a private with a pack sits down in a pew." "Copy," Diaz said, as if he were answering a lover. "Loader, AP up top," Harris said. "We walk clean if we can. If not, we right. Up," Mallory said. Dawn smuggled itself into the hedges with a thief's delicacy. Things took shapes. Crows came to the fields and considered the sudden wealth with rude little laughs. The church spire was a gray pencil through a stand of trees, its broken tip pointing at a sky that had stopped making statements. They moved in a staggered, breathing line, 3 Shermans in echelon. Infantry steps away on either side, all of them exhaling fog that mingled. Their tracks rode in the mud, an alphabet of pressure. Kruger's men occupied the last workable hedge before the churchyard, boxed into the dead corner of 2 sunken lanes. The pock gun they had left was down to 3 rounds and a crew who had lost 2 men before the night. He touched the gun shield and felt the cold of it. He did not believe in omens, but he believed in metal and the way it held the day's temperature stubbornly. Metal and mud and men, today's trinity. On my shot, he said to the gunner. Second tank first, then we shift. When they look for us, the first tank will have offered its side to our brothers in the orchard. If they are there, if not, he shrugged, a gesture of an honest shopkeeper who did not like lying to a customer. About the quality of apples, the gunner nodded in a rhythm that said he had already done the math and accepted the answer even if it wasn't his favorite. The Shermans clambered forward, each nose rising in turn to crest the guttered lip and show belly and mouth to the field, then dipping again to taste the next rut. They didn't give full silhouettes. They never lingered at the top. Their commanders were little hunched saints lit by headsets, counting seconds, parceling courage. The pot gun fired first. The round struck the second Sherman's mantlet with a clang like someone hitting a bell the size of a truck. The tank lurched and smoked from the periscope with a puff like a man blowing on hot soup. The gun slewed toward the pot gun in the same instant. He returned, kissed the gun shield with a heavy slap, peeled it inward like a tin can, and sent the loader's face back into time. Left side, Faust's moving. Blake yelled, "Fucking hell, they're thin as reeds." Murphy swung. Mallory dumped he, and the muzzle spit a piece of sun into the hedge. The Faust boys didn't vanish so much as smear into the ditch. Someone behind them, older, moving in that stiff way that said he'd carried weight through winter after winter, pulled them by their collars back into the earth as though the ground were a door he owned. The church loomed out of fog like a ship. Stained glass had given up a long time ago, leaving jagged mouths that grinned at the lane. The steps were a mush of chips and blackened wood from pews used as barricades and then stolen for fires. American infantry flowed to the dry stone wall and lay there smiling and grimacing like harvesters unloading at a barn. Then the panther that had been quiet all morning spoke from beyond, rebuilt from patience and parts salvaged under the moon. Its shell came along the lane like an opinion no one had asked for and drilled Able 5 low on the right, cutting their hearts and the radio in the same breath. Harris didn't swear. He said, "Now," the same way a man says, "Amen," a punctuation, and Diaz was already counter-turning into the hedge gap they had marked as the crease in this pocket. The cutter bit, the tank shuddered, and the world went green and brown and clawing for 3 seconds until they were through into the small orchard behind the rectory. Panther at 12 and a smear of smoke, Murphy said. Range 200. He thinks he's safe on that 180 angle. He is, Harris said, except we're not where he thinks we are. AP, Mallory said out of habit. Already up, Murphy replied. The Panther's turret started to move only after the American shell left the Sherman's muzzle. You could read the situation by the speed of the rotation, hurried, not frantic. Solid men, not surprised boys. They were turning into the shot. But physics keeps its own clock. The Sherman's AP hit the Panther's turret ring and jammed it 8 degrees off center. The second round, 12 seconds later, drilled the joint between the hull and the turret like a carpenter biting through a mortise. Fire grumped out of the side vents and then roared like a bar room when someone breaks a bottle. One of the Panther's crew standers sat on the lip of the hatch for a second as if he'd suddenly arrived at a cafe at the wrong hour. He turned his head, saw the orchard through a lens of heat, and fell backward like a man who had seen inside a small god. Up, Mallory said, voice smaller than it had been all morning. Hold fire, Harris answered, and for a second the war obeyed him. Men in Feldgrau ran from the church's rear door and skittered for the lane. American infantry shimmied up and over the wall, and someone yelled, "Hands! Hands!" And someone else shouted, "Cover the goddamn sacristy!" And the whole churchyard turned into a whispering of boots, metal clicks, low cries, a dozen personal wars intersecting like concentric ripples. Kruger didn't run. He walked with the exact measure of an accountant who knows the numbers will not improve if he sprints. He put his hand on Lucas's shoulder, felt the tremor under the wet wool, and squeezed once. It isn't cowardice to live to teach someone else why we lost here. he said in a voice so quiet it didn't disturb the raindrops. It's maintenance. Lucas nodded as if agreeing with gravity. Sir, he said, are we beaten? Kruger considered the word. We are corrected, he said instead. We were wrong about the Sherman. Now we know better. It is not a box of matches. It is a fist with friends. He looked at the field and the hedges that would grow back, and the church that would stand forever in someone's memory with its windows gone. We've been fools to laugh at a man who shows up with a toolbox and a team. They reached a sunken lane that bent away like an invitation. He could feel the pressure of the American advance without seeing it. It was not a wave. It was a tide. You did not run from tides. You angled respectfully and found another shore. Inside Harris's tank, the radio spat. Crossroads secure. Church contested. Armor elements to High Street. Watch left. Watch left. Harris answered in a voice like he'd used to convince his own fear to stand quietly in the corner. Able to, Roger. We're behind the rectory. Panther cooked. Ammo good enough. Crew intact. Copy. Able to, came Red Lead's voice, tired as a man's knees. Hold that and push when you can. The world is smaller than it looked yesterday, they pushed. Not like heroes on posters, like men who know tomorrow exists only if you take one more hedgerow today. The High Street wasn't a street. It was a long wound between garden walls and low outbuildings, a place where carts had bumped for 100 years, and the rain had remembered every boot's indentation. A German machine gun tried to defend it, then chose another story when a tank's coax raked the shutter it peeked from. An American bar chittered and then sighed like it needed a cigarette. In a doorway painted black by smoke, Mallory saw a Frenchwoman, middle-aged but older now, staring with a white cloth crushed in one hand. On the other side of the street, a boy stood barefoot, his legs muddy to the knee, holding a slice of bread as if it were a medal. War was very large. War was very small. Don't look too long, Murphy said softly, seeing where Mallory's eyes had gone. You'll want to take it with you. You can't carry it. Yeah, Mallory said, not moving. Yeah. They slid past the doorway. The boy didn't wave. The woman didn't pray. They just stood there. Two facts that would not be erased easily. By late afternoon, the spire was theirs, the crossroads a knot tied in the rope of the line. News came lopsided. Able 3's driver would go home in a box. Able 5's crew beat their track back into something that resembled a circle. A lieutenant nobody liked had been brave at the worst possible time and was therefore forgiven. A German medic surrendered with a man over his shoulder, and no one had the heart to be clever about it. The Panther was still burning enough to snarl the wind. The rain stopped almost ceremonially, as if a clock had run down. The world smelled of wet wood, iron, and the sharp citrus of exploded TNT. A shaft of anemic sunlight found the church's broken window and did its best. Harris climbed halfway out of the hatch and sat with his boots on the seat, his hands dirty to the watch band. He watched infantry settle into positions, watched a sergeant build a map from the ground with sticks and pebbles, watched an officer write a letter on his knee with an ink pencil that kept breaking and kept being sharpened anyway. He watched his gunner keep the sight on a corner even though there were no more corners with teeth here. He watched his loaders stare at his hands like they could tell him something. For the first time that day, Harris allowed himself a breath that wasn't braced for impact. The Sherman beneath him hummed gently, metal still warm, engine ticking like a tired heartbeat. He ran his hand along the turret rim and gave it a firm pat. Not a death trap today, he murmured. Murphy glanced up from the sight. No, sir, not today. Mallory finally pulled his gaze from his hands and looked around. The church spire, the broken hedges, the scorched earth, the living men. He didn't smile, but something in his expression settled, like a beam finding its balance. They would move again soon. Another hedgerow, another road, another field where someone was certain they'd burn. But right now, just for this moment, the Sherman sat quietly in the middle of a battlefield it had survived, and every man who had doubted it, friend or foe, would remember that. Because on this day, the tank that was supposed to die didn't. It endured, and that was enough. The end.